A Podcask of Amontillado is a horror podcast, and so we may cover subjects that are not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to another episode of A Podcast of Amontillado, where we delve into the dark, dreadful, and terrifying parts of the world. Buckle up, because it'll be a terrifyingly good time.
As the introduction said, you are listening to A Podcast of Amontillado. I am your co-host, Gary Mitchell, and joining me, as always, is my lovely co-host.
Erin McGourn, and we are so very excited to have Valentine Wolfe with us today. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
I'm Braxton, and that's just the two of us, yeah.
So, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody should be a little familiar with you because they hear you at the introduction of every episode. And again, I want to be on record to say thank you very much for sharing with us. So, our subject today is horror in music. And there's a lot of different ways we can go at that. So, I'd like to start with the two of you. What attracts you to doing horror material for your music?
I think that really, I think we both start with the fundamental approach that music tells a story. We like to, we like our music to, it's a vehicle for storytelling, and I think just the kind of stories that really resonate with us have just sort of have that horror in their DNA. I think for me, horror is ultimately life affirming. I think that that's sort of one of the commonalities that I see and I read a lot is that there is that moment where no matter how horrible the protagonist or the narrator's life is, they realize that they really still want to be on this plane. And I think that part's always just something that I think is really cool. I think a concept that we were introduced to, I think, comparably recently, is I like that. I think I'll just speak for myself as an artist. I think what I am striving to do is, creating an environment where it's you're almost like a psychopomp or a guide, and you're allowing the audience to experience these emotions, in an environment of relative safety. So it's almost like we were talking about some of the other bands we get to play with, and sometimes you go to different conventions or whatever, and there's a massive variety of music. And I think, well, someone's got to be the haunted house, and I think that's. And I think that there's two kinds of haunted houses, right? When I was growing up, there was this amusement park my family would go to on vacation, and there was sort of like the kind of campy spook show ride with the jump scares and all that. But then there was like the cool kid grown up haunted house that you walked through, and that was more dread, terror, and things like that. That resonated with me. But I think that's sort of what I like about it. I like being able to tell the stories in that mechanism and then explore. I think a lot of the concepts that really just resonate, I think, or seem to be best told, within that space. So that's my answer. What do you think?
I think it's a great way to talk about subjects that might not be as comfortable for people to talk about, such as mental health issues or other topics like that. If you sort of tie it up in a nice horror story, then people find it to be easier to talk about. So I like that people can translate everyday things that everyone experiences into more of a fantastical story, and it makes it easier to talk about.
Very true. And as you mentioned, there's all different types of horror. There's all types of different genres. So, how would you describe it for someone, say, who just has stumbled across you? How would you describe your music and your relationship with horror?
I would describe it as gothic metal. because we love reading gothic books of all kinds. Um, a lot of our albums are concept albums. So we did one all about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but it was also about her relationship with her mother. So that's a specific topic. We did an album that was about a story that was relating to Edgar Allan Poe, and we covered several of his poems and short stories in there. And it wasn't just one specific one, but we made our own little story to kind of explain how we were choosing these different poems and stories to cover. So we love doing concept albums, but it's not always in a shared universe, and we love just picking different topics each time.
Yeah, I think at one point, we realized, I think when we first started, I was really reluctant to say Gothic music simply because I think that had sort of moved into a realm where, we don't, we don't sound like, EDM or EBM, electronic music. That's not what we do. It's not necessarily something that you play at like a club night from DJs and everything. But as we sort of kept developing, after we did Once Upon a Midnight, as Sarah said, and then after that we did a sort of kind of a macabre telling of The Emperor and the Nightingale, but we set it in the Alnwick Poison Garden on our Nightingale record. And all of that, it got to a point, it's like, well, I think calling it Gothic metal really, it does what it says. We heard a friend of ours say that it's exactly what it says on the tin. That's what you're gonna get. It's got the metal textures, the drums, the distortion, and everything, but the subject matter is all that sort of slow burn Gothic horror that we I think that's the kind of media we seek out. It's the kind of things we like to read, and I think it had a lot of even when we first started writing, there was a very heavy influence on, I guess, closer to the literary Gothic more so than certain bands, certain music. I mean, I love Sisters of Mercy, Cocteau Twins, especially. I think the Cocteau Twins may not be super audibly apparent in what we do, but that it's in there. Dead Can Dance for me in particular. So, but I think it has more to do with subject matter and the stories we want to tell.
Yeah, that, and you get 3 goth fans together, and they're all going to argue about, no, that's not a goth album. No, that's not a goth band. Just like horror,
it's kind of how we found ourselves playing a lot of steampunk events, because when we first started playing in the very primordial days of the band, I was attuned to maybe overreacting, definitely overreacting. A lot of criticism from the goth people who were like, y'all aren't goth at all. But like the steampunks seem to be like, oh no, we like what you're doing. So
That's
like,
probably because they viewed
okay,
you
well,
as gothic rather than goth.
I could see that.
There's that distinction where, and you say it even here, where like your gothic metal, I picture like the haunted mansion or the Victorian mansions and things like that. And so I kind of related a bit more to that. And I think adding the gothic kind of helps.
I think once you add also the classical music influences
hmm
too, that just gets you in that sort of music in kind of an ambiguous time period, and it kind of, clearly we love symphonic metal, but I think the way we like to incorporate classical music in our texture is a little bit different than, the bombastic John Williams orchestra we hear a lot of our favorite bands doing. We kind of go a different path with it. So yeah, I think Gothic metal, we called it Victorian chamber metal for a while, which is still I think a really great descriptor and everything. But I think, and that's still fine. I think a friend of ours at DragonCon coined that term, and we really like it. But I think, just strictly speaking, if somebody never heard us before and said, "What kind of music is this?" Gothic metal is really, that'll do it.
So I'm assuming you're both familiar with Sweeney Todd. You may have heard of it. And one of the quotes, the reason I love that is Stephen Sondheim said the main reason he wrote that is he wanted to prove whether or not you could scare people with music.
Right on.
So with your music, are you trying to get more of an atmospheric mood, or are you actually trying to put some fear into people? Or does it just depend on the song?
Well, we've recently had to start writing more of the spooky stuff. So
Hmm.
we'll see how well we do with that, because we've had a couple projects recently, scoring work projects, where we've
Mhm.
had to do more of those kinds of jump scares and atmospheric stuff where we're trying to instill the spooky emotions. So hopefully we'll get pretty close. But a lot of the metal songs that we play at shows, we're really just going for a storytelling vibe there.
So I think thus far, it's safe to say it's been more atmosphere and more of a feeling and more of to get really super into it. Like there's this unnamed feeling that when you're in a mausoleum or you're in a graveyard
Hmm.
or something where it's peaceful and it's tranquil, but it's still a memento mori. And I think some, I think that sort of like tranquil unease is a feeling that I really, I guess, like is kind of a weird word to use, but I think, um, but I would say thus far atmosphere. But yeah, Sarah is quite correct that I think a lot of it is just whatever we think the song or the project needs, and we've been working on certain things occasionally. As of right now, we've got some things in development where we're like, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we, how do we do the jump scares and that kind of thing? So.
I was just gonna say one of my first exposures to you guys was at a convention where you scored a silent film, and that was one of the best experiences of getting to sit there and watch this silent film and then have you all be there being the music. And it should have taken you out of it, but somehow you guys just like made it more. And so it had this amazing atmospheric ability to put you into the place of the movie. And I really wanted to touch on the fact that you guys do amazing work with things like that and did not want to let that pass.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That's super nice.
That is intensely gratifying to hear because we love putting the silent films together. Those ideas were in development for a long, long time, and knowing that people are watching them and liking them and having such great experiences, that I mean, that thank you. That's awesome too.
I can still remember sitting there and after it ended, like you walked out into the hotel lobby and we were like, wait, what? Like, oh yeah, we're at a convention in a hotel.
Yeah, I also wanted to make sure that we brought that up and ask you about that because I've had that experience as well watching the two of you do that. I've also gotten to go to the Carolina Theater in Greensboro where they have the
Mhm.
original pipe organ and see some silent films with the original pipe organ stuff. Oh, that was amazing. But you two, it's much more of that intimate because with the steam organ, as soon as it cuts on, you're hit and you feel your whole body
Mhm.
rumble. But then sitting in the convention with other horror fans with you right there, like you said, it makes an atmosphere, like this little bubble of unreality. What goes into that for you? How long did it take you for that project?
Well, to before I go into that, to pick up some, you just picked up on a really key idea, that bubble of unreality, because we get asked from time to time if we're ever going to record any of this music and release it so people can um, come back to that experience, and the answer is no, because for that reason we are really trying to create that bubble, as you say, but we want it to be very unique
Hmm.
to the audience, to the convention. Just it really brings, I think, brings back that way to experience movies that I personally think is really cool that's sort of come and gone. And I think that committing it to a recording kind of defeats the entire purpose of
Mhm.
trying to bring that atmosphere to life. And I think that then that in a way answers the question. Usually, what we do, we're both improvisers, but I think it's safe to say I do a little bit more of it than you, right? Okay, I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that. Usually, you wind up watching the movie a lot because that's really sort of the only way to rehearse it and everything. I think of the ones that we do now, I think I could probably speak most authoritatively about the first one we ever did, which was Nosferatu.
Mhm.
And for that one, at one point, Sarah wrote these little, leitmotifs or motives for each kind of sequence, and she, just had it sort of worked out on paper. And we just, for example, that's a good one. That sometimes it involves both of us. We just performed Nosferatu at a convention, MarsCon at Williamsburg, Virginia, and
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons, that wound up just being a solo bass improvisation. But I still used a lot of the little materials and a lot of little, she wrote music for Orlok, and then she wrote some things that go with Hutter and Elaine and their scenes and things like that. So even though, she wasn't up there performing with me, I still was using sort of her raw materials to kind of realize the score. And I think now with Nosferatu, we've done it enough times that there are big moments that I think are more or less the same from performance to performance. I mean, we kind of know kind of the big moments we want to get to, and then like the connecting tissue, I guess the improvisation I do, that's a little different every time, and that's again very similar, I think, to how they would do silent films. You'd have what's called
Mhm.
photoplay music, and the pianist or the organist would get like big themes, and it was their job to just sort of connect that with what they saw on the screen. And so um so no so I think in anything we do, like when we've done Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Sarah joins me, especially at the bit the climax where the doctor's having the identity crisis. Sarah does these really cool extended technique vocal things to really be the sort of ominous whisper in the dark kind of thing.
Mhm.
um but if it's a movie we've never seen, usually again we watch it. Sometimes, I'd like to say I'm good and I just watch it, but sometimes if I just want to jam, I'll just put it on, pick up my bass, and I'm like, well, let's just see what happens. And sometimes it crashes and burns, and sometimes some good stuff comes out. Sometimes Sarah will just be sitting there watching it, and she'll be like, okay, I like what you just did. I like that. Um, Sometimes there are bits where we move from the scoring to um, in Nosferatu, where there's a bell chime scene, and I'll kind of play a pizzicato harmonic where I pluck this bass string and it makes a nice high chiming sound. Or some of the audience tells me they really love. I do this extended technique with the bass where I take my the tip of my bow and I rattle it in between the strings, and it makes this
Ooh.
really sort of glassy. It makes makes perfect mice music. So in Nosferatu, where the plague rats come, I'll do that, and people seem to like that a lot. So there'll be kind of moments like that, and just sort of see what the film kind of suggests. And then a lot of it is just pacing it and watching what happens on the screen, and kind of if there's any hits or any impacts or any doors and ship creaking. We like to do that.
Mm.
That's another good thing. So there's a little bit about like that. And then that I don't necessarily have like a formal scene shot. I don't s- I when I first started doing these, I started to try to sit down and write them down. But usually I think for me the key is just watching the movie enough times to where I can not be surprised about what's going on.
Okay.
And then if Sarah is going to join me, then usually what happens is we kind of agree on a tonal center. It's like, okay, this section's an F, F minor, and she'll watch it, get some ideas, and then just do some wordless vocalizations to kind of. What I like is it just adds a little bit of variety to just the sound of my bass, and it gives us a different tonal palette. And
Mhm.
then we could do things where she's just maybe adding a sort of an ethereal veil under what I'm playing, or sometimes I'll
Hmm.
just hold a note and let her kind of take over the action a little bit, and it just I think it's a lot of kind of experimentation and figuring out kind of what works with that. Um, but I love doing them. I think there's at least one more event later this year. Apparently this year, our friend Derek told mentioned to us on Facebook a while back that this is the 100th anniversary year of Nosferatu.
Mhm.
Yes.
And so there's at least one more event coming up on the calendar where I'm going to get to bring that one back. So
Good.
it's
Nice.
always exciting a lot of fun to do that.
Is that one your favorite, or is it cabinet, or do you just have a particular, or you love all the little
It's my
monsters?
favorite currently. I haven't gotten tired. That was the first one I ever wanted to do. Real quickly, the story behind it was the original idea was for a graduate composition project when I was at UGA.
Mm.
I wanted to do it kind of like you're required to give all these performances, and I was trying to figure out a way. I was, finishing my bass degree, and I was doing a lot of composition. I was trying to figure out a way to combine the areas, and I told my bass teacher, I was like, well, what if I did like a silent film and I wrote all these cool electronic patches? And he was like, that's an awesome idea. He loved it. But I think the composition faculty was important that I be a little more well-rounded. So they're like, no, just write a bunch of pieces for small instruments and everything, which I guess was cool and good and everything. But like, since the idea never left, Nosferatu was the first one I did. And I like doing Caligari. I like it a lot. And I've grown to like it a lot more the more I've done it.
Hmm.
But right now, probably my favorite one to do is Nosferatu. Yeah.
And that's what I was just thinking about. That's what I saw you both doing, and it's probably 5 years ago,
Hmm.
and I can still remember some of the tones that you guys did
Nice.
in that, and yeah, it's one of those things that even as you change it every time you do it, we, the audience, don't forget it.
That's really cool. That it's also good to hear because I think it's almost like I guess a shorter answer would be like we watch it, we develop kind of like a recipe, like
Hmm.
and that's kind of how I look at it. Like you're making something in the kitchen, it'll be the same every time, but it also be slightly different. Maybe you tweak it, maybe you put the spices in a little different, or maybe there's some little twist to it that makes it unique every time. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm really stoked. I'm really glad to hear. Sometimes it's weird because when we do them, my back's to the audience a lot,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and I'm like, sometimes I'll be playing. I'm like, are they digging this? Are they stone cold bored? Is this did those wonderful con runners out there just placate the peculiar guy in Valentine Wolfe and say, well, this will take
Any
2 hours off the
convention that
clock,
just, like,
no
says,
problem.
"Yeah, go do whatever you wanna do," is a smart
Yeah,
convention
this is
when it
2 hours.
comes to
Yeah, this is two.
U2.
This is 2 hours of programming we don't have to think about. Just go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but so knowing people really are responding is kind of awesome. Thank you.
Hmm. Yeah, and you two have such a beautiful marriage of styles. Sarah, your voice, and Braxton, your bass, play and blend so well together. And it's just seeing you two live is an experience. Like, I still remember vividly the first time I walked into one of your concerts. I believe it was at Congregate. And Sarah, you were up on stage and moving and singing, and I was just like captivated and stayed for the rest. And I think the very next day I went and went, give me everything you have. um,
We are excited to get to go back to congregate again this year.
yes. And I will see you there. Um,
Awesome.
And
yes.
if you're free, you'll see Nosferatu. That was the event. We were
Oh,
talking.
nice.
We were emailing them back and forth, and I hope it's okay if I announce that. But
If
yeah,
not,
If
let us
it's,
know and we'll just cut that out.
yeah, I'll ask James. I'll clear it with James. um, so what is on your regular albums? What is your process like? Is it more of like the idea hits, or is it you're kind of noodling around and say, hey, I got something here? Or is it a mixture? Like, how
It's a
did
little bit of both, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, like the Frankenstein, the Mary Shelley album. How did that? Was that just something that had been ticking away for a while, or?
I think it maybe started with a book that we read, a biography of Mary Shelley and her mother. And it was
Mhm.
just really, really fascinating. So, of course, we wanted to explore that more. It may have started with that book. And so, we wanted to tell more of that story. I started collecting a lot of phrases and, little chunks of dialogue from the book, Frankenstein, because I thought I got to start setting some of this stuff just like it is, just like she wrote it.
Mhm.
And then, of course, we wanted to tie in the story of Mary Shelley's relationship to her mother, so that changed some of the lyrics.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'll write a little bit, bounce it off him, kind of bounce back and forth.
I think
Mhm.
Haunting of Mary Shelley was unique. That was one of the first albums really that I wrote lyrics for. I When we first started playing, I tried to write some lyrics, and it it wasn't artistically satisfying, I guess, for either one of
Mm.
us. So Sarah was pretty much writing all our lyrics at that point. I think doing a fantastic job, and in general, I think most Valentine Wolfe songs start off with her vocal melodies and lyrics and everything. But she was really awesome during. I do remember it was Romantic Outlaws by Charlotte Gordon. Is the name of the book, and
Mm.
Sarah was reading it from the library and said it would be cool to do something about this. And we had just finished Elegiac Repose, which is the album that the theme music comes from.
Mm.
In that piece, Sarah, the particular piece, Softly Shall You Sleep, I think I named it, but that piece was, I remember I came home from the day job one day and she said, listen to this and hit play. And I was like, well, I'll just add some distortion here and there, but we're done, you know?
Yeah.
It's pretty much start to finish. That track was just, it just sort of, and sometimes that happens. But I think I was like, I'm not sure if I want to do the Frankenstein project yet. And then we were reminded, or I think you very nicely reminded me, it was 2018, and that's the 200th anniversary. That's the 100th anniversary, 200th anniversary. Sorry. So if we were going to do a Mary Shelley record, that was sort of the year. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
so, yeah, we got on it. I think we just wanted to really talk about her, and I guess this is sort of my deal. You know, it's so predictable. You know, on Twitter, somebody will talk about sci-fi, and everyone will
Mm.
trip all over themselves to talk about Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and it's like, well, there's this book called Frankenstein. I have a
Mhm.
feeling people are going to really dig it. Maybe you should. So I don't. When we did that, I don't. You do the research. I don't know how Frankenstein manages to be culturally ubiquitous and underrated at the same time. But I feel like that book is phenomenal. If you haven't read it in a while, go back and reread it. It is way better than you remember it. I promise.
I think too
Um,
often people think of the book and see the original Universal,
right.
and in their head it automatically correlates, and so I love the Universal
Oh yeah. No,
Frankenstein, but
definitely.
it is not the book.
Well, I think that's the awesome thing. It creates this amazing universe, and it can be
Hmm.
everything. But I think that go deeper because Mary Shelley is. I mean, I mean, it just. I don't. You can't. I just I think she's essential. I think
Mhm.
it's just flat out she's essential, and I think you got to talk about how awesome she is. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Even Asimov said she's the inventor of science fiction.
yeah,
Hmm.
so but I think we're trying to kind of bring it all back around, especially for the gothic metal stuff. We're trying to write really differently
Mhm.
um, these days, and just we've got or I have an experiment going on where I'm trying to write some actually fully forged metal songs that have enough space for vocals, and then let Sarah add some stuff to them and just see kind of what results we get. I don't think if we've ever written a song that way where it's like metal riffs and drums, and she said, okay, this vocal melody will work on top of it. I can't remember what that is. Usually I've got vocals and a semblance. I've got an arrangement to work with and everything. Then I'll add drums to it, and then the riffs come in kind of at the very end.
So, kind of branching now into horror and music in general. And I mean, going back to the silent movies, the reason a lot of the horror worked was the music. The reason it is a
Mhm.
huge component of any movie is the score and the soundtrack. And for scoring horror in specific, what do you think the keys are to a good horror score?
Minor. Sorry. Thank
And
you for
Erin
Well, you're
laughing
goes
not
at that
belly
wrong.
up.
terrible joke.
I think the cool thing about that is I think that music history, I mean, trying to um, depict the fantastical and the otherworldly is, I mean, you see compositions all the way into the Middle Ages going back
Mhm.
for that. So there's no shortage of inspiration. There's no shortage of, I think anyone who's hung out with me for any length of time has heard me totally gush over the Mozart Requiem. And I
Mm.
think hearing how, one of the masters handles, you know, death and dying and mourning and grief again, it just get an amazing inspiration toolkit. I think that I think that the trick is, and we've talked a fair amount. Sarah and I talk about this. It's balancing. We were talking about it today, actually, about how you need to set the emotional. I think the emotional tone. I think is the most important thing. I think you want to kind of figure out how things feel, and then I think you really just need to get out of the way.
Okay.
Um, I think the fascinating thing about silent films, obviously, there's no dialogue, so you've got more. Um, I think focus to just tell the story just with the music and everything. But I think even then, I think my goal is to let the visual images sort of dominate. You don't, Aaron, as I think you said earlier, yeah, you don't want the score to take you out of it. I guess
Mhm.
that's the thing. It's like I don't want to write anything where people. Yeah, I think he's not a horror composer as such, but I think John Williams wrote the two most famous horror notes of all time,
Mhm.
and I think it's why he's again just a composer who I think how skillfully is can be understated. How you can write all those memorable melodies and all these it's hummable, it sticks with you and everything, but it all serves the film so well.
Mhm.
So I think that's I think maybe it's universal, but I think that's the key, is just to really let the emotional arc take over and then stay out of the way of the movie. Another I love drones, and I think just what I think makes a great horror soundtrack, the ones that resonate with me. Um, I love the Newton brothers and their use of space with reverb and delays and creating that sort of sound space. I like
Mhm.
that a lot. Um,
Yeah,
we
I
just
have
watched.
recently fallen in love with their music. I I'm late to the party. It was the Grudge remake,
Mhm,
prequel,
Mhm.
whatever, where
mhm,
the afterwards I was like, "This music's fantastic," and I started hunting them down and went, "Oh, they did that. Oh, and they did that,"
mhm.
and just was like, "Oh, I fell down a Newton hole."
Mhm.
We just watched The Night House, like literally, like we
Mm.
finished it last night, and I think can't remember. Ben Lovett, I think, is the composer's name.
Mhm.
I may it's Ben, and it starts with an L. I may need to look at if Ben. If you're listening and I butchered your name, I'm very sorry because your score was awesome, and I liked how what he did. I thought that was very skillful. Was there was a lot of drones, a
Mhm.
lot of, and I think that's a great way for stillness yet sort of an ominous foreboding. Um, Brian Wrightsell, I think, does that in Hannibal perfectly. I think the score to Hannibal is
Yes.
just
Mhm.
Yeah.
stone cold brilliant,
And
all of
it
it.
is Ben Lovett.
Um, so I think I think that I again I think one reason that I in particular, I like horror soundtracks is, when we compose and we write ourselves, the thing that I love about working on the electronic side of the studio is I love space-based effects and time. I love reverb and delay. Like if you told me I
Hmm.
couldn't write anything without reverb or delay, I don't know what I'd do. It's been pretty much everything we put out, and I think that horror soundtracks in particular lend themselves to that sort of um, especially if you take like a unique sound like a cello or in my case a bass and a stringed instrumental with a voice, and it's something that's familiar, but then if you use reverb to create something that's a little fantastical sounding, then you get something that's both familiar but unnerving at the same time. And I think that's what I get super excited about.
Okay. And how about you, Sarah? Who are you listening to these days for scary music?
I definitely love the Newton brothers as well. I think their soundtracks are just so good. And
Hmm.
I mean, I love all the shows that they were in too. So
Oh,
I just love
yeah.
everything about that.
Yeah, their work on Midnight Mass, where they repurposed
Mhm.
the the gospel songs, was
Yeah.
just there. That slow, and again, there's something about slowing down a song. With the
Mhm.
version, the "Nearer My God to Thee," when he's on the boat, and we get that
Yeah.
slow, melodic version of near. It just that scene is powerful, but that music makes it even more. And especially when you throw in the context that it was playing when the Titanic went down, and that was
Mhm.
factored in as part of it. It's just that it's beautiful. I think what they did there.
I love that show so much. I feel like I could watch it over and over again.
Hmm.
I think, well, I could say their approach to Midnight Mass. We put out a digital only dark ambient project recently called A Night of Victorian Spiritualism, and I feel
Hmm.
like, yeah, that was definitely our nod and our homage to what the Newton brothers achieved on Midnight Mass. That score's very inspiring, I would say.
Speaking of inspirations, when did you first realize that you loved horror and you want to do horror music? Or is it just one of those like you came out of the womb with it? It's like asking people, why do you like chicken?
So, like a lot of little kids, yeah, I think probably my first introduction to gothic and horror things is I had a Weebles haunted house when I was like a
Oh God,
toddler.
yes.
I had the ghost, and I
Hmm.
loved the haunted house. I had other Weeble Wobbles, but they defaulted. I'm probably
Fall
dating
down.
myself, but
Uh, I had it
that's
as well. I
okay.
held onto that
I
house for
loved it.
ages.
I loved it. And then Batman comics, and Batman always had a sort of dark noir goth under. I think at least when Batman is done well, in my view.
Right. Yeah.
But I think the horror music and gothic horror, I think the moment that hit was I'd gone to see Fantasia as a little kid, one of the
Mm.
reissues, with my little sister, my stepmother, and I was I 8, 9, 10, something like that,
Mhm.
bored out of my skull.
Really?
I was like, "What am I even watching?" Until Chernobog and Night on Bald Mountain hit, and I was
Mhm.
like,
Uh-huh.
all right, this is
The-
amazing. This is I mean, I liked certain bits of it. I don't wanna be like, "Oh, I hated Fantasia." But I was also I'm like,
You can't hate the hippos.
I'm like at that point, I was like, the hippos are taking me away from valuable Metroid and Ikari Warriors time. So, but
Mm.
man, Night on Ball Mountain, I was like, yeah, and it just, I've loved music like that. I guess when I think about it, I think it's an awesome question because I'm like, how do you get to the point where you kind of wish it were Halloween all the time? Like, what's and I think well, so what are my earliest memories of like this is cool, but like yeah, for me, Night on Ball Mountain and the Chernobog sequence was really pivotal.
Yeah.
Um,
When he does the up, and
mhm,
then it's just like, ugh.
mhm. And
Well,
then
and one of the biggest things I found when I was looking into what people think about music and horror is, and it was a phrase that coincides with something you said earlier, Braxton, of non-linear sounds.
mhm,
And it's those sounds or the compositions of the sounds that aren't commonplace. And so they should take us out of what is happening, but instead they trigger this like
mhm.
response in us that we can still years later recall. And it's because it's those non-linear sounds that are just something about them makes it so we can so easily link them back to those moments.
And
Mhm.
I think too, then you could take almost any piece and contextualize it in a way. I mean, again, I mean, we mentioned Hannibal, and I mean,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
piece of music that everyone associates with Dr. Lecter is the Bach Goldberg variations. But out of the context of Hannibal, there's nothing really about the aria, at least, that suggests, hey, horror movie.
Right.
Mhm.
But if you put it in a certain way, it's those first two notes are pretty chilling, especially
It's
if
the
you're.
same even with like the violin used in the Psycho.
Mhm.
That,
Yeah.
like, there's nothing about that on
Yeah.
its own that should have done that, but when you pair it and when you play it that certain way, everybody knows that sound.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's become kind of a horror music shorthand. I mean, they call it,
Mhm.
I think, scare chords on
Mhm.
TV tropes, where it's like, one of the things about horror that I both love and hate is that sometimes it's real easy to go for that jump scare, and
Mhm.
that's the equivalent of the horror boo jump scare musically.
Right.
And it's like, it's a cheap gag. It works, but it's a cheap gag. Now, how about you, Sarah? Do you remember your first?
Oh man, that's so tough to think of something. I probably have always been like this.
Mhm. To coin another musician, born this way.
Maybe so, yes.
Mm.
I feel like I will never get sick of writing gothic metal and horror songs, but I figure if that ever does happen, then we'll just do something else for a while.
Yeah.
But I just right now I just can't really imagine getting sick of it.
Hmm.
I feel like I could spend 40 more years doing it.
Well, we
Please.
hope you can.
So, if you had to pick a favorite horror score, which one would you go with?
Ooh, that's so hard to choose. I do really like all of the Newton Brothers
Hmm.
scores, but another one that we really like is the Christmas Carol that BBC
It's
did
really
most
good.
recently, maybe around 2018 or 19.
Hmm.
Yes, listen to that one. It's so good. It's on Spotify and probably all the other streaming sites. Who look it up real quick for me and see who
Yeah.
did the score, but it's a Christmas Carol, and it's the most recent version that the BBC did.
It was a duo. I remember that. I'm looking up my favorite because I can never remember the composer's name, and I get upset that I can figure out my answer. But I'm going to look up Sarah's. Um, yeah, that BBC Christmas Carol, we loved it. I mean, I know it had a lot of
Now
mixed reviews, but
that
we
score had a
just.
lot of interesting string writing, and a lot of the score was very stripped down. A lot of times when people think of scores, they want like a big, lush John Williams thing.
Mhm.
Those are so nice and so fun to listen to, but a lot of the ones that we really like are a lot more stripped down and sparse in the
Sometimes
texture.
just one piano note, and it works.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
put their names in here because I don't wanna butcher either of them, but
Oh,
those are who did the, Christmas Carol.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. 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 I
Yeah,
do remember that. Yeah.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
I may get them
Dustin.
backwards.
Oh,
I'm sure.
O'Halloran? His is the easy
that
yeah,
one.
sounds very close. I would go
yeah,
with that.
And
and
then
Volker Bartelmann. And if I butchered your names, I know you're listening.
Okay.
Please.
What was cool about this one is, okay, and I just, because I get them reversed, but Volker is really into prepared piano compositions. I just looked that up, where he really is known for taking the piano and expanding the sonic palette. And then Dustin has background in ambient music, and I think that what we really liked about that is the same thing, like taking, Sarah mentioned string writing, and it's like, okay, well, we're gonna take my bass and, like, well, what can we do? Like, what can we do with it? What can we, if we recontextualize this music and using this ambient music, which, reverb and delay will get you there. How can we, create those nonlinear sounds?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think just the essential horror score for me, and the one that I think is also, like, for a while it was getting used in like every horror trailer ever, but then
Mhm.
again, it's so good. It's a Wojciech Kilar. My Polish is not great, unfortunately. His score to Bram Stoker's Dracula that came
Yes.
out. I mean, that that score is just phenomenal. It's kind of, what we call reference music. There's certain things that it's like, okay, we're trying to write something. We got to get this figured out. What did the score to Dracula do? Because I think it
Mhm.
just really, I think it was, that score was so pivotal, and it was like John Williams. It like changed everything, especially for horror soundtracks. And I think that it's still, I mean, it's so great. It's just so great.
Mhm.
I love that one.
Yeah, I just recently did a rewatch of that for a whole other podcast, and just that music is still just grabs you and
Mhm.
Hmm.
holds on to you and carries you through that movie.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It
And
just,
then
yeah.
and then I could go for an hour talking about Annie Lennox's love song for a vampire at the end of the.
Hmm.
I also really like Graham Revell. I think he's a really good composer of some dark stuff, like his score for The Crow is
Okay,
really
yeah.
good.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, I know the name. Yeah, I think, yeah, there's a lot of great horror. And I mean, we didn't mention it either as a favorite, but I mean, we love the Newton Brothers. I think
Hmm.
both the hauntings of, Bly Manor, Hill
Oh
House,
Yes.
yeah.
terrific. And I'm embarrassed to say I'm not going to be remembered to the composer team who did it. Which reminded me of another horror score and another media I should talk about. But we really liked the music in Archive 81.
Mm.
We saw that recently, and we just how they incorporated media in that. And I mean, again, how there's like also kind of like a loving history of film kind
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
embedded in that as well. But the other score I was going to talk about is, we both really, really liked the entire team behind the score to the video game Bloodborne.
Mm.
I think
Yes.
there's like three different composers I think worked on that, and that doesn't even count the arrangers. Um,
There's a lot of video games that when you talk about composers that video games don't get entered into that
mhm.
situation. But you talk about creating that bubble again, like, you can't do that without the composers and the arrangers that work on those video games.
I think Michiru Yamane, her work in Castlevania is
Mhm.
like, she's just. I think she's another composer who just deserves way more hero worship and adulation. I think. But yeah, the Bloodborne score in particular. I mean,
Mhm.
we actually have recorded our version. We played the music for A Hunter's Dream. That's just amazing music as well. Very inspiring.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find who composed it, but thinking about the video games reminded me the Resident Evil 2 score
Mhm.
Yeah,
is like
yeah.
that's like the first video game score that I went tracked down and bought because I
Hmm.
wanted to hear that music outside of Running in Terror from Mr. X.
Right, right, right,
But the piano music when you go into the police station, or just there's a lot of really cool ambient dark stuff. And with video games, you have to be able to make it where it loops without getting
right.
repetitive.
Hmm.
Yep.
And I think that's a skill a lot of people really underestimate.
Hmm.
Well, and I think was it 7, Resident Evil 7 with the swamp?
Yes.
The score for that one, and it's one of the first Resident Evils too that has actually had vocalization, like an actual song with lyrics and things with it, that, like, "Go Tell Aunt Rhody" is a chilling song that will get stuck in your head, and you'll find yourself singing along to it, and you're just like, "Why? Why is that there all of a sudden?"
Mhm.
I'll have to check that out. I'm actually not familiar with that score.
Oh gosh, I
Mhm.
think you're gonna like that one.
Yeah. And then just speaking of piano reminded me one of my favorite scores for horror was the one from Creepshow, the original
Mhm.
Creepshow, by John Sutton was the producer and John Harrison was the composer. And I think that to this day is why anytime I hear piano music in horror, you've got me. I'm locked in.
Nice. I'll have to revisit that one. I remember seeing that one, but I don't
Yeah.
in
There's just
in the depths of my memory, I can't really recall what it sounds like right off, but it'll
yeah,
definitely
there's
get I'll
yeah, they
spin
just
that
do
for
some yeah, they just do some lovely things with light piano and then ah, and it's just like, okay, my brain, you've got my brain.
Well, and I feel like we can't talk about this, or at least I can't talk about this without bringing up Manfredini. That,
Mm,
like, my childhood is is in part because of the composing he did on the Friday the 13th and
Mhm.
Swamp Thing and, Slaughter High,
yeah.
and which it's a terrible movie, but the music in the background to it is
Hmm.
still something that, like, you will recognize, and Halloween, which is
Mhm.
Carpenter, of course, and
Yeah.
Friday the 13th to me have like, I know that sound anywhere.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. We could talk like an entire hour about John Carpenter and his
Mhm.
scores, but we are kind of running out of time. Would you two mind sitting in this alcove for a few moments while we do some housekeeping? Um,
Um, Not at all. Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
cozy.
Thank
I like
you.
it.
We made
Where
it big enough
can,
for the both of you, so.
yeah. If people are interested in hearing more of your music, where can they see you live and where can they throw you cashy money?
ValentineWolfe.com is the most obvious place. Spell wolf with an E at the end. And I think a lot of independent creatives were on Patreon, and I think again Valentine Wolfe with an E will get you there. I think in terms of shows, we maintain a pretty active show calendar. We're playing conventions quite a bit. I think the next show that we're doing that as of yet is not sold out will be down at Atomicon in Charleston, South Carolina later on May, and then we've got kind of a lot of things going on this summer. But yeah, we're local to Greenville, South Carolina, so we play fair mouthed there, local shows. We play the occasional brewery, the occasional winery. Which I couldn't. You have a lovely collection, by the way. I couldn't help admiring it as we got settled. So yeah, just I think check us out there. Jump on our mailing list, and we're on all the usual socials, easy to find.
Indeed. Well, thank you both very, very much for stopping by. Erin, you've got the last brick there.
Yeah, here you go.
That's,
Oh, thank you. I'm going to just slide this into place here.
but for the love of God, podcasters,
Yeah,
no!
for the love of God. You have been listening to A Podcask of Amontillado, a production of Good to Be a Geek Media. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends, then like, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you would like to support our efforts to explore all of the dark, dreadful, and terrifying parts of the world, please join our Patreon, where you can gain access to behind-the-scenes materials, backer-exclusive episodes, vote on upcoming topics, watch the video recordings of each episode, and other bonus content. Please visit our webpage, www.goodtobeageek.com/shows/APOA, where you can find show notes, host and guest bios, links, merch, and more. If you have any comments, questions, corrections, or suggestions for the host, please find and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, or send an email to apodcaskofamontillado@gmail.com. We are also part of the Good to Be a Geek Discord. Feel free to descend into the catacombs for a visit anytime. Opening and closing music is Softly Shall You Sleep by Valentine Wolfe. Please look them up on your music platform of choice or at www.valentinewolfe.com. A Podcast of Amontillado is trademark and copyright Good to Be a Geek Media. Logo and show art is designed by Erin McGourn. This episode was produced by Gary Mitchell. Avino Atrocitus. This broadcast is presented in partnership with Good to Be a Geek Media. Let your geek run wild. The opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of Good to Be a Geek. To learn more about this broadcast and other shows in the network, visit goodtobeageek.com or find Good to Be a Geek on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at goodtobeageek.